Welcome to Slash Forward. If there were anything better than going on holiday in Mexico with a group of your best buds, it would probably be spending a portion of your time there exploring the rich history of the region's long-forgotten ancient cultures. Of course, if in so doing, you happen to find yourselves forcefully relegated to the top of a mysterious pyramid and, over time, found your skin to be crawling with little worm-like larvae that have to be cut out from deep below the surface of your skin, that might tip the balance toward making the trip not worthwhile. We'll get a more concrete understanding of what all this entails as we take a tour through the 2008 film, The Ruins. Set in a remote rainforest, a group of college friends accompany a recent acquaintance to a secluded archaeological site to round out their trip. But by disturbing the grounds, a community of locals force them to the top of the pyramid and keep them there for unknown reasons. The group then finds themselves struggling to survive under threat of being killed for trying to leave, insufficient rations to sustain them atop the structure for more than a day or so, and Jeff's insatiable desire to prove the value of his first-year medical school education through constantly trying to cure his friends of what ails them by cutting off pieces of their bodies. Be sure to drop a like or a comment on the video if you happen to have an annoying friend like that. And while you're here, check out some of my other videos. They go down so easy. Let's get to it. We open on a woman in a cave, or perhaps some ruins, crying out for help. Unfortunately, no one ever comes. And then she's dragged off into the darkness. Then we take a sweeping view of a rainforest before zooming in on a gang of nubile young friends hanging out and playing gin, as was so popular with college students back in 2008. Jeff and Stacy finish up their game as Eric returns with margaritas. But all of this is put on hold when Amy realizes she's missing one of her most important earrings. Observed from across the way, this is the perfect opportunity for a save by Matthias, a swarthy gentleman of Germanic descent. He produces the precious missing trinket and is rewarded with a drink, which leads naturally to a casual conversation. Matthias is alone today because his bro Heinrich went to visit his girlfriend, an archaeologist working at an excavation site. They were looking to sightsee a local treasure that's more off the beaten path, so he invites them to accompany him tomorrow if they're interested. After a brief survey, they unanimously agree to partake in what the locals would likely consider a desecration. That night, the gang prepares for their excursion by getting blasted. Jeff is first back to the room, leaving Matthias to pick up the slack left by Jeff's unwillingness to dance the night away. Pretty soon, Eric and Stacy are peeling Amy off him. The next morning, Jeff finishes his run to find Matthias and Dimitri copying the map, so Dimitri's cabal of Hellenes can catch up with them once they sleep off their drink. Jeff then runs up to gather the troops. Feeling sick and generally sullen about the idea that Jeff will be leaving for med school, Amy takes some convincing to get her going. But Jeff is a persuasive man and natural leader, so soon we find them hopping off the bus at the last civilized stop on their journey. They find a cab, but the taxi man warns them to steer clear of that particular pyramid. But what do the locals ever really know about the various sites and attractions surrounding their town? And soon they're heading down the old dusty trail. They get dropped off at Heinrich's Jeep, where it's officially remote enough to preclude the possibility of using cell phones. For all except Matthias, who has a specialty phone specifically for this purpose. Once that's established, they begin the 11-mile hike into the dense rainforest. In no time at all, they reach the last major landmark before arriving at their destination. They are observed from afar by some curious children. While they attempt to communicate with them, Matthias finds the trail, which had been intentionally covered over with some large fronds. The girls do wonder about this and consider whether it's wise to carry on, but their second thoughts are overruled, and the group continues under the watchful eye of a young Mayan girl. And see, they find the site very quickly, making this simple trip completely worthwhile in every possible way. They have only just begun to ponder which stairs they'll climb first when a very serious man busts through the tree line, dismounts, and shouts at them in an unknown language. Jeff is an expert at dealing with people, so he offers up some dinero. This offering is declined, and then some more horsemen emerge. They try to impart that they're simply there to meet up with their bro, but this also doesn't do the trick. As they try to pierce the language barrier and find a common understanding, Amy snaps some choice photos to try to capture the essence of this confusing and alarming moment. Unfortunately, it only adds to it as they are worked into a frenzy. Thinking they desire the camera, Dimitri attempts to help deliver it to him, but instead absorbs an arrow and a headshot. It then becomes unclear whether their attackers are warning them away or forcing them up. But when even more armed reinforcements arrive, they elect to go up. At least that way, there's still a chance that they might find Heinrich. Unfortunately, both both tents are empty, and even with such a clear line of sight, they don't get any better signals up here. Also, Matthias's phone was confiscated by the man. They check to see if there's any safe way down, but they find themselves surrounded. Then, Heinrich is sighted, covered head to toe by an invasive weed with an arrow in his chest. The group is dumbfounded by the sudden drastic negative change in their situation. Jeff watches and notes that many locals seem to be gathering outside and setting up a camp. Meanwhile, Eric wonders what happened to the archaeologist, while they also notice that Matthias seems to be having an allergic reaction of some type from touching the plants. Despite the poor outlook, Jeff remains optimistic that either Dimitri's friends will soon be there to help, or the hotel will notify someone when they fail to check out the next day. His assertiveness here seems to make him the leader by default, but then they hear a ringing. Matthias points out that Heinrich had a fancy phone similar to his, and it appears to be getting a signal even deep within the stony structure. So they scramble to try to safely descend into the pit before it goes off. Unfortunately, and despite their intent, they experience the opposite outcome. They have to push past their initial shock when signs of life begin to emanate from the dark. Jeff sets to checking the remainder of the rope for structural integrity so they can lower one of the girls into the pit. I mean, he would go himself, but he's manning the crank. If he left, who would crank then? Stacy volunteers and is soon descending deep into the heart of the pyramid. They reach the end of the rope, but she's not yet at the bottom. However, with Matthias begging for help, she goes ahead and hops down.
I got my knee!
Oh, and in her white pants, too. She works to get some light down there so she can more easily extricate the glass currently making love to her knee. Meanwhile, up top, they work on figuring out how to make some extra rope, while down under, Matthias reveals that he can't feel his legs. Stacy calls up this news and also reports that it smells like shit down there, which Matthias tries to determine if he should take as an insult. Jeff immediately springs into action despite Amy's protests about the dangers of moving someone with a broken spine. Desperate for an alternative, she runs down to ask for help, but finds the language barrier to still be a hindrance. Upon reaching peak frustration, she throws some weed at them, hitting a young boy. Their instant reaction gives some hint as to what their major deal is.
He touched the vine.
You all have. As the sun goes down, Amy's lowered with a makeshift backboard via an elongated rope. They're still a few feet shy of rock bottom, but Stacy insists on getting this wrapped up so they can get the hell out of there. So they very carefully prepare to lift him, but ultimately provide an extreme chiropractic manipulation. Now that he's up, Jeff recommends not moving him again, and also thinks they should look for some aspirin. In doing so, he finds Dimitri's plane ticket for the next day, providing additional encouragement that his countrymen should be there tomorrow to try to find him after he misses his flight. They then bed down for the night, taking shifts to keep an eye on the locals, sometimes from very close up. The next morning, Jeff chooses violence, showing them Vines what he thinks about him. Then Stacy wakes up feeling an unusual tingle in her leg, and this time it ain't Eric. When the leaves fail to brush off, she realizes that the vines didn't just creep on her, they crept up in her. Eric gently pulls it out as Matthias also senses something wrong with his legs. When they go to check them out, a similar horrifying problem is revealed. As they process this, Eric recognizes that they have spores growing on their clothes as well, but then they're distracted again when a ringing sound reminds them that while they were in the pit, they never got the phone. Jeff makes quick preparations to send the ladies in and search it out, as it may represent their only chance for salvation. Once down there, they light up and venture into the weeds, driven on by the constant ringing of the phone. They're then startled by a shuffling noise from the thick bush, which probs wasn't her. And while this unknown victim does have a fairly modern phone, it isn't the one that's currently ringing. So they continue on until Amy comes to discover that the sound is actually emanating from the undulating stamen of the flowers. The vines then make their move, and the attack forces them to climb back through the brush as the vine system attempts to hinder their escape. They're cranked up just in time and relay the unfortunate phone news. Amy's sole focus is now on getting off that pyramid, as they recognize that they're being forced into an involuntary quarantine. However, Jeff remains insistent that the safest option is to continue to wait, assured by his privilege that someone must already be searching out the missing gringos. So they hang in there. With all future goals and activities now moot, they narrow in on surviving while rationing and conserving their resources. Stacy mentions that she still has the strange feeling of the vine being inside her, probing around, but Jeff is focused on the danger of sepsis developing in Matthias's dirty leg wounds. Intoxicated by the allure of becoming the talk of med school, he feels encouraged to perform a double field amputation of Maddie's legs under the auspices of saving his life. There is some reluctance from the group, but Matthias gives his full consent. Jeff gives a complimentary bite leather, mostly for ceremonial purposes, as he insists that Matthias wouldn't have any feeling in his legs. Despite his assuredness, when he brings the stone down to break the bone, it certainly seems like he's feeling everything. Jeff sets to work amidst the screams, and sloppily but with drive and purpose disconnects his lower extremities. Once done, any sense of satisfaction is quickly forgotten in the face of the horror presented by the vines coming to take their meal. That night, Jeff goes back down to work some things out with her captors, while up top Eric provides a little comfort to Amy, resulting in Stacy insisting that she heard them making love in the moonlight, and right in front of her, which is so disrespectful. While they're all distracted by this, the vines take advantage of the opportunity to finish off Matthias. Jeff pulls them out, but it proves to be too late. Stacy then gets real dramatic about having some vine in her, and they're all taken aback when the flowers begin to mimic her in concert. The next morning, the survivors observe as the tribesmen salt the soil around the pyramid to keep the plant growth contained. Jeff also notes how creatures of various types seem to know to stay away from the area, indicating it must be very old. Then Eric calls everyone over for an update on Stace, who does, in fact, have some of that stuff creeping around inside her. This gives Jeff a prime opportunity to get to cutting again. He goes in deep and really does a job of cleansing her body. I mean, she's gotta feel at least a little better, right? She must, because she wants to keep cutting everything, even beyond Jeff's threshold, so you know it's bad. He insists they stop, but she's definitely showing additional signs of infection, which they confirm for her by refusing eye contact. This prompts Eric to declare his intent to make a break for it that evening, no matter what. But later on, during nap time, Stacy goes out on her own to look for her friend Knife, while under the influence of the flowers. The others wake up and emerge from the tent to find her engaging in a significant mutilation event with the knife, which she also employs against all who try to stop her. After Eric bleeds out internally, the vines again come to clean out the mess that's left over. Stacy begs to be put out of her misery, and having not yet taken the Hippocratic Oath, Jeff obliges as the locals listen to the hell unfolding at the top of the pyramid. After a bit, we return and find Jeff slathering Amy in blood, providing instructions for her escape plan, including how to reach the Jeep. He then takes her down, making a big show of saying goodbye to her at the foot of the pyramid, and then playing like he's thinking about making a run for it. He's really just laying down a distraction to facilitate her escape, but he does too damn good a job of acting, as they end up filling him with arrows before he's returned to the vines. Meanwhile, Amy's broken through the barrier and goes tearing through the woods as arrows whiz by all around. She manages to make it to the trailhead and drive off in the Jeep, but as she begins to feel the relief of her escape, her affliction is revealed. Shortly thereafter, Dimitri's buddies emerge into the clearing, completely unaware of what's in store. The Ruins is another one of those movies that just kinda came and went. Although its box office was fairly good in comparison to the budget, it wasn't a massive hit. Despite that, I think this is one that deserves to be held up as a standout from that time period. It takes a fairly simple premise and does a really good job of delivering on it. There are a few places where it could have been tightened up a bit. The confusion about what the pyramid protectors wanted was done very well, but I think they went a bit overboard telegraphing the issue by having Amy just fully submerge herself in the vines, especially since they made the issue so overtly obvious later when the little boy had to be executed. If they had relied on that later scene to clarify things, they could have maintained a little more suspense. Also, the story is very much character-driven since it revolves around a small group of people in a tight location. Despite that, they devote 2 scenes to Eric and Stacy's sex life, which didn't really add anything to the story. It's not necessarily bad, but it just seems like this time could have been spent in other ways to build up other more relevant aspects. Although I suppose it's possible that it served a practical purpose in potentially making the film more marketable overall. Either way, I think these are minor issues. The film is overall pretty good, and it went hard when it needed to. Before we go, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks uncensored movie reviews of Life Force, Under the Skin, and Possessor, with others to be added over time. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.